Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The late autumn afternoon settled over Eli Mercer's land in a quiet, steady way. The kind that came when the air turned cold enough to sting the nose and the light dropped fast behind the distant ridges. Eli rode back from checking the far cattle line, his horse moving at a slow, tired pace, hooves pushing through dry patches of grass. He had been on the saddle since early morning, riding the fence to see if any calves had slipped through during the night and making sure no stray riders had crossed his property. It was a routine he had followed for years, ever since he chose a life far from town and far from the noise he no longer wanted in his days. Eli was 38, broad-shouldered from ranch work, his skin weather-beaten and pale beneath the grime of dust and sweat. He kept his dark hair short because it got in his way otherwise, and the gray creeping in at his temples had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the kind of losses that settled into a man and didn't leave. He lived alone by choice, or at least that was what he told himself. It was easier than admitting that he stayed away from people because he didn't trust himself to protect them anymore. As he rode closer to the cabin, he noticed something off. The fence rail near the front yard sagged slightly under a strange weight. He slowed the horse to a halt, dismounted, and walked forward with careful steps, his hand unconsciously resting near the knife on his belt. He had seen trouble before. Men sometimes drifted through this part of the land, and trouble usually followed them. But it wasn't a man. It was a woman, an Apache woman, slumped forward with her wrists chained to the top rail. Her bronze skin was mottled with cold and exhaustion. Her head bowed low, her hair falling in tangled strands mixed with worn leather strips and old beads. She was breathing, but barely. Her fingers twitched as though they had been fighting the restraints for hours until she could no longer do it. Eli stopped a few paces away. His first instinct was caution. He didn't know who put her there or why. He didn't know if someone was hiding nearby, waiting to see who would approach. His eyes swept the yard, the ridge, the brush line. Nothing moved. No tracks fresh enough to worry him. Only wind pushing dust across the ground. Then something else hit him, quiet and sharp. She wasn't posing as bait. She wasn't pretending. She was suffering. Her wrists were rubbed raw, darkened from dried blood, the skin broken in several places. Her breathing was shallow, the kind he had seen in injured animals that had given up fighting. She lifted her head slightly when she heard his boots in the dirt. Her eyes were red from wind and fear. The moment she saw him, her whole body tensed, expecting the worst. Eli felt a heavy pull in his chest, the kind that came when memory mixed with guilt, faces he had failed in the past, moments he wished he could change. He forced himself to breathe steady. Fear wouldn't help her. Hesitation wouldn't help her. And leaving her was something he knew he couldn't do, not with those injuries, not chained out in the open like something meant to break. He knelt in front of her slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them, letting her watch every move he made. "It's just me," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." She pulled back anyway, her shoulders scraping the rail. Her voice came out broken and small, shaped by hours of cold and fear. You can do whatever you want," she whispered. "Just don't let me die out here." Her words landed hard. Eli's jaw tightened. That kind of fear didn't come from nothing. It came from people who treated her like an object, not a human being. He didn't answer right away. He shifted his focus to the lock instead, studying the rusted metal and the way the chain twisted around the rail. She flinched when his hand got close, and he paused, not because he doubted the choice, but because he didn't want her thinking she was at his mercy. "You'll be free in a moment," he said quietly. He pulled a thin metal pick from his coat pocket, something he kept for fence repairs and broken latches. His fingers were steady, even though his thoughts weren't. Whoever had chained her here had left in a hurry. The lock hadn't been closed properly. It clicked open after only a few seconds. The chain dropped from the fence with a heavy thud. She collapsed forward, her arms folding weakly toward her chest, as though she didn't trust that the weight was gone. Eli stepped back fast, giving her space so she wouldn't think he was about to grab her. He could hear his heart in his ears, not from fear of her, but from anger at whoever had done this. He went to the cabin door, opened it. and returned with a blanket and a tin cup of water. He didn't press them into her hands. He set them on the ground in front of her and took 2 steps back. She watched him closely, trying to understand why he wasn't touching her. After a long moment, she reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the blanket to her chest. She drank the water in slow, shaking sips. Her breathing changed just slightly. Not relief, not safety, but something like the first breath after drowning. Eli waited until she lifted her eyes again. "You can come inside if you want," he said, "just for warmth." She hesitated, studying him with guarded suspicion. Her entire body told him that trusting anyone had gone wrong for her before. But the cold and exhaustion pushed harder than fear. She rose unsteadily, leaning on the fence once before walking toward the cabin with short, careful steps. Inside, the lamplight cast a soft glow over the wooden walls. Eli moved aside so she could enter without feeling cornered. She stopped near the door, unsure if she was allowed to go farther. Eli pointed toward the chair near the table. "Sit if you can." Her knees nearly gave out when she reached it. He heated a pot of water on the stove, pulled out clean strips of cloth from a storage crate, and set them on the table near her, letting her see every small action he made. She looked at the supplies, then at him, waiting to see if he expected anything in return. "I'll take care of the wrists," he said, his tone low and steady. "Only if you let me." She nodded faintly. As he cleaned the wounds, she winced but didn't pull away. He worked carefully, focusing on the torn skin and swelling. He saw the fear in her eyes, the distrust, the exhaustion. She had been hunted or punished. He didn't know the details yet, but he knew enough. Someone had intended for her to be found by the wrong kind of man. Eli wasn't that man. When her wrists were wrapped, he stepped back again. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Rest. No one will touch you." She didn't answer. She only watched him with a mixture of fear and disbelief, as though she had never heard such a promise before. He gave her the cot and laid his own bedroll on the floor against the far wall. He wasn't tired yet. Too much had happened in too short a time, but he pretended to settle in so she wouldn't feel watched. She lay on the cot stiffly, turning slightly so she could keep him in sight. Eli stared at the ceiling in the dim lamplight, thinking about how she had ended up chained to his fence, wondering who had left her there and whether they would return. He didn't have answers, but he knew one thing clearly. No one would take her again while she slept under his roof. Not if he was still breathing. The cabin settled into a heavy silence after the long, tense night. The early morning cold pushed through the gaps around the doorframe, carrying a thin draft that swept across the floorboards. The woman stirred first, lifting her head slowly from the cot, as though unsure whether she was waking into the same place she had fallen asleep. Her eyes moved around the cabin, taking in the walls, the stove, the table, and then Eli, who sat on a wooden crate near the far wall with his elbows on his knees. He had not slept much. Every few minutes he had opened his eyes and checked to make sure she was still breathing, that she had not collapsed further or tried to slip out into the cold out of fear. Now he watched her with a slow, careful gaze, trying not to make her feel cornered. Her expression was tight, as if she were trying to piece together where she was and what had happened between the moment the chain fell and now. Her hands rose instinctively to her wrists, her fingers brushing the clean cloth bandages. When she noticed that they had been tended during the night, she curled her hands into fists, unsure what to think. Eli broke the silence first, not with a question, but with a simple action. He stood, walked to the stove, and stirred the pot he had set on the coals earlier. Warm steam rose from it. He didn't say anything about food or ask if she was hungry. He just filled a tin bowl and placed it on the table in front of the chair closest to her. She looked at it, then at him, suspicion lingering in her eyes. "You can eat," he said quietly. "No one here is going to force you into anything." He meant it plainly, not as reassurance, but as fact. She shifted slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself as she moved from the cot to the chair, her bare feet barely touching the cold floorboards. She winced once, a small reaction, but clear enough for him to catch. And he noted how frail she still was, how dehydration and cold had pushed her body past its limits. As she ate in careful, small bites, Eli kept his distance, leaning against the wall near the window and watching the yard through a narrow crack between the blinds. The outside world remained still. No fresh tracks, no distant riders, just the quiet stretch of land and the thin morning light. She broke the silence suddenly. "You didn't touch me." Her voice was low, hoarse, cautious. "No," he said simply. "You could have." "I didn't." There was no anger in her tone, no gratitude either. Just confusion, the kind that came from living too long around men who treated survival as a bargaining chip. Eli returned to the stove and poured himself a small amount of food, eating with slow, steady motions. She watched him the entire time, not with fear now, but with a kind of wary calculation, as if trying to determine whether he was too good to trust or too dangerous to ignore. When she finally set the empty bowl on the table, she drew her knees up and wrapped the blanket tighter, her shoulders rising and falling with an uneasy breath. Eli stepped toward her, not close, but near enough that she could hear him clearly. "I need to know something," he said. "You don't have to tell me everything. Just enough so I understand what we're dealing with." Her lips parted, hesitated, then closed again. She lowered her gaze. He waited. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled in a controlled way, like someone trying to share just enough without reliving the rest. "They took me far from home," she said. "They wanted me to do things I wouldn't do. When I ran, they dragged me back. Last night, they chained me here, thinking someone would," her voice faltered. "Someone would use me." Eli felt the tension climb into his shoulders. He didn't interrupt. "I thought you were one of them," she whispered. "When I heard your horse." "That's understandable," he said. She looked up sharply, almost startled by the lack of judgment. "You didn't want me here," she said. "I saw your eyes." "I didn't expect to find someone chained to my fence," Eli answered. "But I never meant to leave you there." Her jaw tightened. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. He wasn't expecting it. She asked next, almost reluctantly, "What do you want from me now?" "Nothing," he said. "You're hurt. You're cold. Rest until you can stand on your own." He turned to check the window again, making sure she saw that his attention wasn't fixed on her. It gave her room to breathe. She took that moment to study him. The worn canvas coat hanging from his shoulders, the early gray in his short, dark hair, the tired lines at the corners of his eyes. He didn't carry himself like someone hungry for power or control. He moved like a man used to silence, used to the weight of yesterday's memories pressing down on today. Finally, she asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" Eli hesitated. "Lost people I cared about," he said. "Came here to work the land and keep quiet. Been doing it for years." "Does anyone come check on you?" she asked. "No." She nodded slowly, understanding him a little more. "What about you?" he asked softly. "Anyone looking for you who means you well?" She looked away. "No." That answer carried more truth than she probably intended. Eli exhaled a slow breath, a decision settling quietly inside him. "You can stay," he said, "at least until you're strong enough to walk without shaking." She didn't accept the offer right away. She didn't reject it either. She looked at him with eyes that held suspicion and something almost like relief fighting underneath it. He stepped back toward the door, checking the yard once more. "Men who leave someone chained like that don't usually come back for anything good," he said. "If they return, I need to know sooner rather than later." Her hands tightened around the blanket. "I don't think they'll stop looking," she whispered. Eli nodded, jaw setting in a way that showed he was already thinking ahead, the kind of thinking a man does when danger is coming whether he wants it or not. "We'll deal with it," he said, "one thing at a time." For the first time since he freed her, she didn't look away. She watched him with a long, silent stare, the kind that came from someone trying to understand the difference between safety and luck. And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't look like she was preparing to run. She looked like someone beginning to believe she might survive. The morning settled into a tired quiet as the sun climbed slowly over the low ridge. The cold eased a little, but the air inside the cabin still carried a faint bite. Eli stepped outside first, pushing the door open with a muted creak and scanning the land as he always did at daybreak. He moved with the kind of deliberate steadiness that came from habit, eyes sweeping the fence line, the road, and the far tree line before anything else. He wasn't expecting trouble, but he didn't trust the kind of men who chained a woman to a stranger's fence. That kind of cruelty didn't happen once. It lingered. It tried to return. Inside, the woman pulled the blanket around her shoulders and watched him through the open doorway. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the chain again, the dust at her knees, the cold biting her fingers. She tried to shake it from her mind each time, but the relief of waking in a warm room made her feel exposed, as if comfort itself was fragile and temporary. Eli walked back inside, brushing dry grass from his boots. They didn't come through the yard, he said. Tracks are old. Nothing fresh. He said it casually, but she understood the meaning beneath it. He had checked for danger for her sake, not his. She lowered her eyes, torn between gratitude and the instinct to keep her distance. She still didn't know what he wanted, what his rules were, or whether staying was wise, but walking out alone would be a death sentence in her current state. Her legs were weak, her ribs tender from days of running, and the cold air outside had made her shiver until her teeth hurt. Eli poured water from the kettle into a tin cup and set it on the table closest to her. It's warm, he said. Helps the shaking. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her fingers cramped around the cup from how tightly she held it, trying to bring heat back in her hands. Eli moved to the corner where he kept his tools, checking them one by one. He hung the hammer on its hook, placed the saw against the wall, coiled the rope neatly. She watched him with quiet focus, noticing how he positioned everything with purpose. It wasn't for show. It was how he lived, order in a place where the world outside remained unpredictable. Her voice came softly. You do all this every morning? Most mornings, he said without looking up. Gives me a sense of what's changed. And today, she asked. Nothing's changed yet, he answered. Her breathing eased slightly, though her shoulders stayed tense. He finally sat at the table, eating a small portion of beans he had warmed. She ate too, though her bites were careful and slow. Every sound, the spoon clicking the bowl, the shift of the chair, made her flinch a little before she caught herself. Eli noticed. He didn't comment. After a few minutes, she spoke again. The men who took me, they don't give up easily. He stopped eating, but kept his eyes on the table. You think they know this place? I don't know, she said, but they saw the direction I ran. They know the land better than I thought. Eli tapped his thumb once against the wooden table, a habit of thinking he didn't realize he had. If they're coming, they'll leave signs, he said. I'll see them before they get close. Her gaze drifted to the window. You're not afraid of them? Everyone's afraid of something, Eli said quietly. But fear doesn't fix anything. She studied his face, trying to understand how he could speak so plainly. He had the look of someone who had been forced to make hard decisions for too many years, someone who carried the past like a weight he couldn't set down. He must have sensed her watching because he added, I don't look for trouble, but I don't run from it either. You're here now. That means I'm responsible for whoever comes. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from how unexpectedly firm the word sounded. She wasn't used to anyone claiming responsibility for her safety. Later, she tried to stand fully for the first time since waking, and her legs wobbled. She caught the edge of the table to steady herself. Eli was across the room in 2 steps, but he stopped short of touching her, letting her have control. You all right? Just tired, she said, forcing air into her lungs. It's better than yesterday. You can sit, he said, motioning toward the chair. No reason to push it yet. She shook her head. I should help. I can't just sit while you do everything. Eli paused. You don't owe me work. Maybe not, she said, eyes dropping to the floor. But working makes me feel less like a burden. He understood that more than she realized. Then do what you can, he said. Nothing more. She gathered the bedding from the cot, folded it neatly, and straightened the blanket. She moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from weakness. Eli returned to the doorway to check the weather again, giving her space to work privately. While she swept the floor using a small straw broom, Eli spoke without turning around. That chain wasn't meant to kill you, he said. It was meant to break you. Her hand stopped mid-sweep. I know, she whispered. Whoever put you there, they wanted someone to find you in a certain state. She swallowed hard. And you weren't supposed to be someone who let me go. No, Eli agreed. They weren't counting on that. The real